to another Unwinding with Fiber and Fabric and Tour de Fleece 2023. As you might notice, if you were watching yesterday's video, I have switched from spinning the white fiber, the white coriadel, and I now have red silk being spun. I went ahead and got started on it because I do find it's a little easier to spin very, very fine once I get the first layer on the bobbin. So I went ahead and started, but we will we'll spin up some more of this very, very fine red that I will use around this thicker white. We will spin it up and see where we get to. But first, let's go ahead and check out today's topic. We'll go ahead and set those back behind me. My treats for later. When is the yarn finished? That is a very good question. And while it sounds like a pretty simple question, let's talk about the finishing of yarn and when do we call it finished? When can we say it's done? And mostly, how do we finish it up? So even when we finish spinning and we finish plying, there might be some other things we can do to change the nature of, oh, my wheel is not happy. My wheel is definitely not happy. When I put this bobbin on the wheel yesterday, something adjusted, I'm not sure, but I've been fidgeting with it. I think a lot of it is just the bobbin, but I ended up moving something around, adjusting something, and I had to clean all of my bearings and check out my drive band just to see if I could figure out what was making noise. In the end, after everything else was double checked, I think it's just the bobbin is maybe a little out of balance. So pardon my wheel if occasionally it makes some rude noises. So before I get into the topic, one of the things you might notice is that I'm spinning much finer than I was spinning yesterday. I want this to be a very, very skinny single, a very thread-like single, so that it will be, so I'll be able to manipulate it around the fuller white coriadel and hopefully create spots, red spots, not a barber pole, because I'm hoping that the very fine thread will kind of embed itself into the other single as I apply it, except in the areas that I might try to do a coil. Or I'm thinking, you know how when you ply the yarn, when you ply your yarn, sometimes if you've spun something really single or skinny, sometimes you get a little curlicue, like a little pig's tail, where one part of the single wraps back on itself and you don't catch it as you're plying, and next thing you know, you have this little tail. I'm actually thinking that might be what I do, is intentionally create little pigtails sticking out, little eyelashes. So I'm spinning this very fine. I have no idea if my side camera is going to be able to pick it up or how much extra footage I'm going to be able to put in. But I'm going slow, getting a lot of twist to hold it together, because the fiber I'm using is the, I hope I'm saying this correctly, Tusha silk. But I want to make sure there's a good amount of twist in it. I want it to be a good, strong, very, very fine single. So I'm going slower. I'm keeping my hands a little bit closer together, mainly so that I feel like I have a little more control over it. Getting the pull, the tug on it, the draw of the wheel up, getting that just to the right level has been a bit of a challenge. as soon as I get it, like right now, I've got it backed off a little bit and it's working really well. But as soon as I get full in one area of the bobbin, I have to, and I adjust, I have to sometimes adjust to have it, the take up. That's the word I was looking for, to adjust the take up on it. But yeah, my wheel is being very cranky today. I normally do not spin extremely fine fibers on this wheel. That is usually reserved for my symphony. But I thought I'd give it a try because, well, first it's good to see what the, put the wheel through its paces, and it can certainly spin a fine yarn. It's just not my preference. And the second reason is this is my daughter's wheel, and it still has not been as broken in as mine. So I'm trying to get everything kind of broken in, trying to identify where its sweet spots are, get the, make sure there's oil getting to everywhere that needs to be, and just kind of getting a feel. And while in some ways it's a little more finicky than my other minstrel, in other ways it's not as noisy. My other one, there's a clank where the footman, yes, I think that's what I'm talking about. They clank a little bit, and so I'll get it will talk to me. But I think the noise I'm hearing off this wheel this time really is the bobbin. It's probably a squeaky bobbin. It's probably one that when I put it on my symphony, it squeaks, and in this case, instead of it squeaking, it kind of groans. And that happens when you get bobbins. You'll find that sometimes they're not as balanced. There's some, a little bit of an issue. That's what you get with things that are made in bulk. Sometimes they are a little better off than, some are a little better balanced, better made than others. No fault to the company other than the fact it's just part of the manufacturing process. You're going to get some that are happier than others. Oh goodness. I now am talking about happy little bobbins. I sound like Bob Ross the painter. For those of you that know who he is, happy little bobbins. So, the topic, when is your yarn done? When is it finished? Wow, this thing is just making noise. It is going to drive me crazy. I don't know how much of it you're picking up on the microphone. I'm picking up on it. It was not making this noise last night. This is a new one. So, it's the way it goes. I have a feeling that sometime between now and the end of Tour de Fleece, there'll be other issues that crop up. But those of you that watched my Vlogmas spin along will know that I had this wheel gave me squeakiness then too. But it's this time it's kind of a humming noise. It's different. All right, so I keep getting sidetracked. Put my notes up here so I can see them in the bowl, see them better, and remind me what I'm supposed to be talking about. Oh, it's day 3, isn't it? And I'm already getting loopy. So, when is the yarn finished? We have spun the yarn. We have plied the yarn if we're going for a plied yarn. Is it now done? We've taken it. We've taken it off the bobbin. We have maybe nitty-knottied it, or taken it off our drop spindle, because yeah, it definitely would count for a drop spindle as well. Is the yarn finished at this point? Well, truthfully, while we could technically call it done, there are some steps we can take that will help the yarn become a little bit more user-friendly. And the biggest one is setting the twist. And there are different ways to set the twist. You can steam it, take steam to it. My preferred method, a lot of times simply because I am using, I like to use a lot of hand-processed fleece, hand-dyed fibers of my own. The first thing I do with my hank of yarn after I have taken it off the bobbin, and it's on the nitty knotty, and it's secured in a couple places so it won't in about 3 to 4 places so that it won't tangle. The first thing I like to do is take it over to a bowl full of hot soapy water. I have a cat. I wish I could catch some of this on the camera. I know that occasionally if they're over here you see them, but my cat has her mouse, and she is playing with and tossing it around right behind where the camera is, and oh, let's just hope we don't get some sort of strange catastrophe, although it could be funny to watch everything tip over, right? So the first thing I do with my finished hank of yarn is I take it over to a bowl of hot soapy water, and I wash it. It can be anywhere between just letting it soak in the water. I can even agitate it a little bit depending on what the fiber is and what I'm trying to accomplish, especially if I want to fool the term. So fooling the yarn is to agitate it just enough to make the fibers kind of begin to mesh together. They open up and they kind of start to interlock. It is not felting, but some might consider it partial felting. But it's, unless it's an extraordinarily felty, look at it and, cross-eyed and it felt type of fiber, the washing process at this point isn't going to cause it to felt. It's just going to cause it to full up a little. One of the things that happens when you do this to the yarn, though, to be aware ahead of time, is that the yarn goes from, from twisted together because it's been plied, but it goes from its kind of beginning state. And if you've spun it, especially if you've spun it woolen, but even if you've spun it worsted, if it is a fiber that wants to fluff up, if it is an airy, fluffy fiber like the Coriadel I have here, when you start to full it, it's gonna bloom. It's gonna come to life. It's gonna expand. It's going to open up like a flower when it's in its bloom. So it's not going to get a halo unless it is a haloing yarn, but it is going to bloom. It's going to fill up. It's going to open up. The twist of the ply will lock itself together, and it can help it balance out. Now, there's a number of things you can do at this point. People will thwack it. People will, I just read one where you go outside and you spin it around in centrifugal force. And I was like, oh, I haven't tried that one. Now, after I have soaked my yarn, I have a spin dryer. And I will put that in the spin dryer and spin out all the excess moisture. If you don't have one of those or a salad spinner, you can, and you don't want to, put it under that type of centrifugal force, you can simply roll it up in some toweling, and in essence with the towel, squeeze out the excess water. We like to avoid using the terminology wring out the water. I think there is a lot of avoidance to wringing out our yarn, probably because of the strain that it is putting on it under. It's not necessary. It's probably not necessarily good for it, but definitely squeezing out the water when it's wrapped in a towel is a way to help get some of the excess water out. The more excess water you get out, the quicker the yarn is going to dry. And we all like to, be able to use our yarn once it's ready. And now I have another kitty over here playing with one of their cat toys. I apologize if any of the noises are being picked up, but it can't be any worse than my squeaky wheel if that's being picked up. So I like to soak my fiber. I like to wash my fiber. I find that it helps remove any of the stuff that didn't quite get removed when I was being gentle with the unspun fiber. You can be a little more aggressive with a hank of yarn than you can a fluff of fiber. So I like to do that. I like to see that, you know, if I've hand dyed it, I like to test to make sure that the dye is now completely washed out, if there's any bleeding, if I have had excess dye. And I like to, you know, wash out any dirt and grime that may have, you know, gotten into it while I was spinning. And anyone who has cats, and cats that like to spin, know that occasionally as you're spinning or plying your yarn especially, you might get kitty help. Kitties who think that they need to floss their teeth with your yarn. And so for me, a good soak is just a natural step. But there are times in which you do not want to do that process. You may not have a fiber that, you may have a commercially prepared fiber that you feel you're really comfortable with, just wanting to set the twist. In which case, yeah, it's perfectly acceptable and perfectly functional to just take us steam bursts to it. So if you have an iron that does a burst of steam, click and steam. If you have the steam guns that people use to take the wrinkles out of your clothes or curtains, that works as well. One of the things also to remember though is that when you're setting the twist, especially if you are fooling the fiber, soaking it and fooling it, you will lose some length. It will shrink because the fiber is going to contract into itself. It's going to not, now you've plied it around itself, it's going to want to bind, it's going to want to hold it together, and it helps create a stronger yarn. Therefore, if you have put it on a niddy noddy and you said, oh, well, I have this many yards, and you really want to be more accurate, it is best to then re-hank your yarn when it's dry and measure it, because it will change the measurement. It's not a bad thing unless, of course, you really are wanting to have that extra measurement, but keep in mind that as the yarn is used and the yarn is washed with a sweater or whatever you're making, the fiber is going to still want to contract when it's wet, when it's washed. Now you can block it out and stretch it out, and that works. But it is good, I think it's good to know ahead of time what it is we're working with. And while I love to have my stuff treated well, if I'm going to knit something, I want to handle it well, and I'll hand wash it and treat it well. I also want to have, and I do this with my sewing as well, I want it to be user-friendly in its final product. So for me, setting the twist and fooling the yarn just a little bit helps prepare it so that when I treat the final garment a little bit less delicately than I might, my yarn's already prepared for it. So it's like when I take cotton fabric and I pre-wash it before I sew the clothing. I want any shrinkage to happen before I make the garment. Well, I kind of take that same principle with my my yarn. Do a little bit of the fooling, allow the fiber to settle into its happy spot, and then it's good. Now, when I talk about fooling, I'm not talking about more than 5 minutes. A good soak, you can soak it. Now, if I'm going to soak it, I'll maybe just put it in a bowl of water and walk away and leave it. And then come back and rinse and do the same thing with a rinse. If I want to actually, you know, if I know that the alpaca while it had been washed, still had some grime in it, because I could see it on my fingers as I spun, I will then, do a little bit of vigorousness to it. But that's the thing. We're talking about a finished yarn. So what happens is it starts to bloom. Now, I'm going to, and I'll talk about this in a later set of notes. There is one downside to doing this. If you are a weaver, you probably don't, unless it's a weft fiber, and even then, you probably don't want a lot of bloom and halo forming on your yarn before you weave with it. You're probably wanting that process to happen after it's been woven. So that is the one thing that can change your perspective. But there is a way around that. And as I talk about yarns for the different processes later, I will mention it again. I would still full my yarn if it was going into a warp. I'd probably still full my yarn if it was going into a weft. However, if I did not want it blooming, if I didn't want, and definitely if it has Angora in it or more mohair, if I didn't want it halo, I'd probably just simply soak it a little, be a lot more gentle with it, and I might even consider putting on it a sizing to hold in all that fluff until after the weaving process. So that is something to keep in mind, is that know the project you want to have it for. Now, if you're trying to make a really pretty yarn and you want to show off all of its characteristics, you don't want to have the halo hold back. You want that halo to show, because then the people who are seeing your yarn are going to go, oh, look at that beautiful Angora with its beautiful halo. But once it starts to halo, it does become a little bit trickier to knit with or weave with or crochet with. So just keep that in mind. And that's the beautiful thing about hand spun. You, the spinner, get to decide how you want to finish that yarn. But I really am of the mind that you want to at least set the twist. So, in one way or another, you want to have that twist set, and that is most easily done by getting the fiber damp. Maybe if you don't want to completely soak it, fine. But getting it damp and allowing it to mesh together and relax. But again, my preference, a good bath. and so deciding when the yarn is finished, deciding, I guess in summary, deciding that the yarn is finished often includes deciding how you're going to use the yarn. Even if it's going into your stash, you're kind of giving a thought to what its end result is going to be. Now, with that being said, you can always come back and add a sizing afterwards. If you Google search sizing, you'll see a lot. It's just oftentimes just a starch-based, water and starch-based product that stiffens, and in the case of yarn, it's not so much about the stiffening as in the holding in all of the, basically putting a coating over the yarn to keep the fuzziness in and to give it a little bit of abrasion resistance. I would not necessarily want to knit with that, but I definitely, even though I am not much of a weaver, I have been around enough weavers and I've watched my daughter, I understand the principle of why you would want to have that sizing on your fiber for the weaving. So as I've said, I know in the last episode, I believe, of this, the last vlog, sampling can be a good thing. Playing around with it. Take a small test sample of your fiber, or just spend some time testing out different finishing techniques, different things, like play around with the sizing. You are a hand spinner, and as much as the fiber may seem precious, it's only precious. We only really create a precious item if we're comfortable with what we're doing. And one of the best ways to become comfortable with what we're doing is to do it, to play with it, to try it, to experiment. So I have managed, I think I haven't been spinning as thin while I've been talking as I was when I wasn't talking to the camera. But I have been able to spin a little bit of silk. And it looks like we are ready to wrap up another video. So thank you again for joining me on this spinning adventure. And I will look forward to seeing you. I hope I've been clear. I hope I haven't been too confused or distracted by the cats. If you've liked the video, please feel free to hit like. Don't forget, you can find more updates on my Tour de Fleece process on my Ravelry, Facebook, and Instagram accounts. But I hope that you will take time to unwind with some fiber, and during this Tour de France time, or some fabric if you're just watching it because you're looking for something to watch and you find me a useful resource in that. But I wanted to wish you a happy and wonderful day of unwinding with fiber and fabric, and I hope to see you again tomorrow. Until then, happy spinning, or simply have a happy day.